We're back with another Mandalorian rectangular table discussion, and needless to say, the core predictions that Eric and I have been making for the last several weeks did not really come to fruition. The main one that kind of did come true that I alluded to last episode was more Luke Skywalker. What did you think of that?
I mean, it was neat. It kind of felt like when Sephiroth shows up and he's more leveled up than anyone and, like, nobody can actually hurt him, but Sephiroth is on your side this time.
You're referring to in Calm when he's doing the flashback sequence on Mount Nibble, and Sephiroth's regular attack does like 3,900 damage.
Yes.
Comments that I've been reading have been mostly like hardcore fans that were thrilled to finally see Luke Skywalker in Legends Luke, like Prime Luke, where he's off being like a Grandmaster level Jedi and is probably the most powerful Force user in the galaxy for a short period of time. What did you think of the CGI job? I wasn't really sure what to think of it. It didn't really look like Luke to me. I was kind of disappointed given how much budget they have and the technology we have now. I thought it would look more representative of 5 years after Return of the Jedi Luke, but I thought it kind of sounded off and it looked off to me. What did you think?
It looked earlier than, like, Return of the Jedi Luke. And, like, I think that was one of the big detractors of that theory is, like, how, like, this is a show, not a movie. Are they going to have the budget and, like, the time frame to do it right? And, yeah, not really. He kind of looks like a video game character. And it's about on par with, like, I guess, Moff Tarkin and, like, Princess Leia before. But I guess that doesn't get even easier to do. It's not like there have been no shows with, like, weird, bad CGI effects before in history.
I have a theory that's a little bit far-fetched. I saved it for the recording so I can get your raw reaction to it. What do you think are the chances that the Luke Skywalker that showed up is an Imperial LMD?
Ooh.
I didn't think about it the first time I watched, but the second time and the third time I watched through that episode, I wondered if it was at all possible that whether it was Moff Gideon or whether it was somehow Thrawn related, somehow or other, maybe they had a failsafe or maybe it was their plan the whole time to create an LMD Luke Skywalker to show up and take Grogu, and therefore Grogu ends up in Imperial protection or under their jurisdiction no matter what. If it was an LMD, then Grogu wouldn't sense anything's off because his DNA would have been the same.
Or they could have used, like, his blood to give an LMD force powers. And that's what they had already used it on. But he's got, like, the green Return of the Jedi one. But he threw that away. Like, Darth Vader's dying, he throws his lightsaber and he's like, I'll never turn to the dark side. So they have that lightsaber to use.
That lightsaber was tossed, but then wasn't that Death Star blown up, though? I guess it's possible that lightsaber could have survived and then fallen through the atmosphere and landed somewhere where maybe the Empire somehow retrieved it. What makes my theory kind of long-winded and a stretch is, like, how would they have gotten an X-Wing and how do I explain R2? But I suppose if they're making LMDs of Luke, then they could probably pretty easily make it.
Droids are pretty easier to copy than humans.
Do you think that's at all plausible, or am I just barking up a crazy tree here?
I mean, I don't think that they would take that far, but it could happen. R2, by the way, seemed kind of tall and skinny. Like, it was weird CGI of R2.
I don't know if I'm just watching too much Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. lately, where it seems like every other episode there's a new life model decoy of somebody and another, like, plot twist where it's like, oh, that's not who you really think it is. But the second time I watched the episode, I wondered if it's a life model decoy of Luke, and I didn't see the woman that was giving orders on the bridge. I didn't see her officially get shot. So I'm wondering if somehow she was dispatched by Gideon right before they were boarded, and perhaps she somehow activated the failsafe life model decoy as like a last resort. With that being said, Gideon did seem genuinely terrified when the Dark Troopers stopped punching. That part of it made me think that maybe it's a Thrawn thing and not necessarily a Moff Gideon thing. Moff Gideon also tried to immediately like shoot himself. I don't know if you noticed he like put the pistol up against his chin. So it could have possibly been not his plan, but maybe it was a Thrawn thing.
Or it could be one of those like overly convoluted plans where like he knew somebody would stop him from shooting himself, and like it's super precision because he does in this episode seem like a Loki, and so probably in like Rangers of the New Republic or whatever, there's gonna be a scene of him taunting them from like inside a glass prison, just like Loki and just like Joker and just like Khan and just like Javier Bardem in that one Bond movie. All these people who have these like precision plots that like rely on the train being on time and like everything happening like clockwork.
Which is why I think maybe it's a Thrawn thing, because he seems a lot more well versed in the elitely calculated out and depending on people reacting a certain way. I guess I just hope that that's sort of just like the aha moment of season 3. I understand that it's very far-fetched and I may get heat for it, but that theory came to me the second time I watched the episode, and then the third time I tried to pay close attention to see if we officially see that one Admiral chick. I don't know if she's for sure an Admiral, but the chick that was giving the orders to Bo-Katan when she was flying the Imperial Cruiser and she was saying, permission denied, I didn't see her get killed. So maybe somehow she was either working for Thrawn, or maybe Gideon somehow dispatched her ahead of time, because he did know to go to the prison cell and put the Darksaber up against Grogu, because he knew that they were going to try to go to the main floor. He knew that Bo-Katan and company were going to go to that floor, and that he figured Din would go off by himself, because when push comes to shove, Din trusts himself. So he was going to say, I'm going alone. And he probably planned for Din to beat him, because he looked very like, for a guy that's supposedly a former ISB, as Cara Dune said, he seemed like he got his ass kicked. I wasn't expecting Din to take him out that easily either. And like you said, he was very cocky and confident about it until later on in the episode he seemed panicky and suicidal. He seemed like even though he was captured, he had them right where he wanted them, just like a Loki type character.
And he did say, assume I know everything.
What are your thoughts about Boba Fett going forward and Fennec? You had said during the episode while we were watching, you said that maybe the Fennec that was with them on the rescue mission could possibly be a different Fennec. Like maybe there's two. Maybe that's a different life model decoy situation.
Speaking of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. being life model decoys.
Maybe it's one of those continuity error kind of things, but I noticed that Fennec immediately went for the blue drink. I'm guessing it's spatchka. That's been a recurring theme of this show. If she's got mostly cyborg guts, I don't know how she'd be able to drink spatchka or drink anything really. As a sort of inorganic, I don't know how that would make sense. Do you think it's possible that Fennec was a robot and that's why Boba Fett just kind of dipped and possibly the human Fennec is with him? Or do you think it's the same cyborg?
Yeah, that could just be like they joined up later, and we don't know how much later he went back to Tatooine. Or it could be a bluff that, like, she even had cyborg guts.
How would that be a bluff, though? Because we saw in that episode how she opened up her...
Well, not a bluff, but like a fake out within that she's got the cyborg guts, but she's, like, maybe got enough human to drink still.
Do you think Boba Fett's going to be the main villain in Mandalorian going forward? Do you think now that he kind of controls the underworld, do you think he's going to be a neutral character that's kind of doing his own thing off screen? Or do you think the Boba Fett show that is supposed to be happening is going to become the Mandalorian show?
We kind of talked about that, where like the Mandalorian in question is whoever they want it to be for that time. I feel like a lot of casual fans were only watching for Baby Yoda, and now that he's gone, people aren't going to tune in. They also have to resolve the whole Excalibur thing of which Mandalorian is going to be the Mandalorian. There's probably going to be some stuff Din and Bo-Katan are going to have to fight over the Darksaber.
Towards the end, Din said that he was going to see Grogu again. But that was probably a very blatant foreshadow as well.
I think when they first announced the show, The Mandalorian, everybody was assuming it was going to be a Boba Fett show. Batman first showed up in a comic called Detective Comics, where it wasn't necessarily a Batman comic, it just kind of turned into that over time. Doctor Strange just happened to show up in a comic called Strange Tales, so they could have like a shifting protagonist. Having like 10 shows at once, it's kind of like the Titanic, where like if one show tanks, they could just shuffle off ideas that they still wanted to use onto another show, and just do it at some other time in some other way then.
In Legends, Boba Fett has a daughter with a character that isn't canon. Some people were speculating that maybe they're going to use Fennec Shand as the mother for Boba Fett's future daughter. Do you think that's at all plausible? And do you think the fact that Fennec is mostly cybernetic matters?
It doesn't matter in WandaVision. So you think they're gonna like fast forward to like Rey times and like their daughter's gonna be like grown up and like they'll do a story on her?
There was some speculation that they could make Fennec and Boba be the parents of Boba Fett's daughter. Then that's a fairly young character that they can do whatever with as Star Wars progresses. I've also been reading or watching speculation on YouTube or whatever that this Mandalorian and some of the stuff that's been going on is a way to sort of retcon the sequels. Just based on apparently like how some of the wording of how Kathleen Kennedy was sort of explaining some of the shows. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're connecting this time period of, I guess, 25-ish years before the rise of Skywalker and whatever. She didn't necessarily confirm that it's connecting the dots, so that kind of leads me to speculate and some others to speculate that they're trying to change history or act like the Rey stuff is sort of an alt timeline, and I think a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans are kind of hoping that the sequels are just sort of written off like they never happened.
I think when the prequels came out, like a lot of people felt that way about those. They needed shows to fix the prequels. So yeah, they are using a lot of shows probably to fix a lot of the sequel mistakes.
Season 2 ended in a very open-ended kind of manner, so they can really go a number of different ways. That's partly what made me think of the life model decoy angle. That could kind of be the kind of thing where they start season 3 off where it's like in the future and then the season 3 kind of works up to where they start off type deal. A lot has unfolded. They pick it up like at the end of the season in episode 1, and then most of the season is flashing back and it explains like how they got to where they are. Yeah, you thought that Grogu was actually safe and with Luke Skywalker and R2 going to whatever vague Jedi temple that Luke is starting, but actually it was a life model decoy the whole time, and Grogu is in Imperial hands right now.
Aren't a couple of shows going to come out before the next season of Mandalorian too?
I'm pretty sure that the Rangers of the New Republic show and the Ahsoka show are the only direct spin-offs of Mandalorian. I believe those are working within the same timeline, but I think they're their own separate thing. I don't know how much those are going to cross over. I've been operating under the assumption that the Ahsoka show is going to explain what ended up happening with Ezra. That was kind of why I wasn't overly surprised that Luke showed up. That was kind of why last episode I said that bringing Luke in would make the most sense, because in the back of my mind I figured Ezra has always been more connected to Sabine, and Sabine was last connected with Ahsoka. So I believe when Ahsoka met Din, it was like days before where we end the Rebel show, in the epilogue of the Rebel show. So I think the Ahsoka show is going to deal with her and Sabine tracking down Ezra, and I think Thrawn is probably going to be the main villain of that show. With the Rangers of the New Republic, as you kind of alluded to last episode, that's probably going to mostly deal with Cara Dune. I had also heard that there was going to be some sort of show where Cara Dune and Bo-Katan were teamed up, so I don't know if that's going to be that or if that was just a false rumor. The Mandalorian Season 3, it's really hard to say. I don't know if it's going to be like Defenders, where it picks up at the resolution of Ahsoka, or it picks up right after the resolution of Rangers of the New Republic. What are your guesses or predictions?
Well, probably the main thrust of it, maybe in addition to whatever they have to do to get Baby Yoda back, is resolving the, like, who takes over Mandalore and fighting over the Darksaber and figuring out how Bo-Katan lost it in the first place. So it'll be like the Civil War arc of this, like, Star Wars world. Hero versus hero duking it out over this thing while the different factions of the Empire are hatching their plots and we're not paying attention to them.
The whole Bo-Katan versus Din thing doesn't seem like that would be a full season of controversy. We've seen the Darksaber change hands a couple times throughout Clone Wars and Rebels. We saw Pre Vizsla had it in Clone Wars, and we saw Maul challenge him, and he took it from him and killed him. But that wasn't even a full episode worth of fight. Like, that was 5 to 10 minutes or so of one episode. Later on in Rebels, Sabine finds the Darksaber that was left behind by Maul. She technically didn't have a rightful claim to it. She took something that wasn't really hers. She got it taken from her by Gar Saxon. Sabine used Ezra's lightsaber to fight Gar Saxon for it. She beat him in the fight, but she didn't kill him. And then Ursa Wren is the one that actually shot Gar Saxon. Technically, Sabine won the fight, but she didn't kill him. Technically, Sabine didn't really have a rightful claim to that Darksaber. So she passed it along to Bo-Katan the first time, but really, she was giving something that technically really didn't belong to her. I guess I still kind of think that the rightful owner of the Darksaber is Maul, because he never had it directly taken from him in combat. So really, I mean, I get why Bo-Katan won't take it. She didn't compete with anybody in combat to take it. The show made it kind of seem like Moff Gideon took it from her in combat. I would like to see that fight, and I would like to see how that came about. But as far as Din versus Bo-Katan, I think that would be a good fight. I just don't know if that would be a full season arc. I think that would be like one episode, if that.
Well, the fight itself wouldn't, but like the politics and like the taking sides and like getting people on their side would take like part of a season.
Some people have been speculating that there might be some sort of, not necessarily life model decoy, but there might be some way to have Maul be there, but it's not the original Maul. It's like some sort of robotic copy of Maul type deal, or some sort of clone of Maul. I like Maul, but at the same time, I think it kind of cheapens his death in Rebels. I think the death in Rebels was supposed to be finite and very symbolic. How at the very end of it, Maul figured it out. He figured out that, no, Obi-Wan isn't just some punk that got lucky on Naboo. He's actually a serious Jedi Master. Obi-Wan wouldn't be hiding out on Tatooine like some hermit if that wasn't exactly where he needed to be, and if his purpose wasn't extremely important to the survival of, I guess, the universe itself. He was there protecting someone, and Maul was willing to die knowing that if Obi-Wan was there protecting it, that was how, in his mind, that ultimately the Sith was going to be overthrown, but really it was to bring balance to the Force. So Maul mostly put it together. He had his own selfish interpretation of what the end game should be, and he was right. In sort of, I guess, eliminating the Sith per se, it was also rebalancing the Force. If you had your pick of who is ultimately going to be the ruler of Mandalore, who would you prefer?
Probably Bo-Katan, but if Din is the main character of the show, it's probably going to end up being him.
Personally, I think it should be Sabine. I just want to see her actually fight somebody and kill them for the Darksaber. Realistically, Maul had it and sort of abandoned the Darksaber, probably unintentionally, but at the same time, I think Maul just kind of took it because it was more like a trophy to him, more so than the symbolism of it all. But he did legitimately take on Pre Vizsla, who almost even cheated in the duel. Pre Vizsla used the Darksaber, but he was also using his jetpack and he was using his pistols. So he was using stuff in combat that I don't know if you're necessarily supposed to use.
This could also be a key to like how the Empire / First Order comes back, because they don't care about honor or tradition or any of the like symbolism of any of that. While these people are fighting each other, they can just come in and blast everybody.
I just want them to pretend like none of that ever happened. I really don't want them to connect the First Order to any of this. I really want them to sort of rewrite history, so to speak. Do you think that's at all possible, that they'll just pretend like that never happened, like it's its own alt timeline, and they'll continue the story? I mean, they still have 25 or so years before that of story that they could do, so there's a lot that they could say went on before the First Order really took over. I believe Force Awakens is 30 years after Return of the Jedi, but it also sounds like the First Order has kind of been in assumed power for at least a while when that picks up. So there's probably 20 to 25, give or take, of wiggle room that they could use leading up to that. But I really just want them to pretend like that never happened and continue the story differently.
I don't think that's happening. I think they dumped too much money into that to ignore it. And a lot of people wanted everybody to pretend the prequels never happened like that, and they kept making shows to try to save them. I think they're going to keep trying to save the sequels that same way. Or they can just keep re-editing them and like re-putting digital stuff in like they do with the classic trilogy.
Overall, were you satisfied with the season 2?
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
Do you think we'll see more of Luke, or do you think that'll be sort of a one-off cameo, like, yes, we're acknowledging that Prime Luke existed, here's what you've been begging for of Prime Luke, obliterating a bunch of Dark Troopers like they're nothing, this is what a Grandmaster and his Prime looks like. Personally, I hope that that's it. I'm tired of them doing these recycle old original trilogy characters to try to pander. I'm sick of them doing that. I want them to do more characters like Din, or try to create more characters like Din that are new and fresh, and test out different characters and see if they resonate with fans or not.
Well, I think for most people, the original trilogy is like the quote-unquote real trilogy, but like, they're not going to be able to bring back the actors. They can barely bring them back. They'll have to be digital video game characters of these people walking around. So yeah, they are going to have to flesh out a whole universe and not keep doing the like Robert Downey Jr. cameo, Hugh Jackman cameo type thing.
Do you think it's at all possible that they would use that opportunity to pick up the story with some of the EU stuff, like Mara Jade and Leia and Han's actual kids, and try to canonize George Lucas's original treatment, or canonize more of the EU topics and stories, just like how they incorporated Grand Admiral Thrawn into the quote-unquote new canon?
Or what if Rey and Kylo are actually Han and Leia's twins, and it shows them getting, like, mind-wiped? The sequels are some, like, fantasy illusion that they get sucked into.
This question's kind of a two-parter, just out of curiosity. Would you have any interest in seeing Hera / Jason Syndulla in live action, or possibly even like Chopper and Zeb?
I think they are trying to gradually bring the cartoon characters into live action, so it is definitely possible.
Do you think it's possible that they'll ever make a live action of when Obi-Wan was a Padawan? Do you think anybody could play Qui-Gon other than Liam Neeson?
Not really. But he's kind of swore off action movies.
Phantom Menace is all we've really gotten of Qui-Gon, other than a handful of cameos in Clone Wars as a Force Ghost, and we got his voice for a second in Rise of Skywalker. We need more Qui-Gon, I think, and I am a lot more interested in him and Obi-Wan's adventures from back in the day, before Phantom Menace.
He was kind of an afterthought when they were making the Phantom Menace, I think, because it kind of indicates in the old movies, like, that Yoda was the one training Obi-Wan, and they were just all of a sudden like, hey, you know who's cool? Liam Neeson. Let's give him a lightsaber.
Obi-Wan definitely was trained by Yoda, because in the novels, Obi-Wan was part of a group of younglings, and then when it came time to do trials, they basically have this tournament to try to impress Jedi Masters. Qui-Gon had recently taken the trials and became a master. On a side note, that's another thing that I would be interested in is his adventures with Count Dooku, as the master.
That's what I was about to say, like, because Qui-Gon was trained by Count Dooku, wasn't he?
Yeah, Qui-Gon was Count Dooku's Padawan, and then he took the trials and became a master. He advanced through very quickly. In his little, like, tournament thing, he purposely fought with one hand behind his back to try to impress Count Dooku and was basically showboating the whole time. I think that's how I remember it was almost effortless for him. When it came time for Obi-Wan to do the Padawan trials or whatever, he wanted Qui-Gon more than anything. It was his whole goal, and like an entire book basically was focused on Obi-Wan trying to overthrow his one rival or whatever.
I think there's a book that has been forgotten and like invalidated where like before Qui-Gon trained Obi-Wan, he trained some guy named like Xanatos who turned to the dark side.
Yeah, you're right, that Qui-Gon had a couple Padawans. He had sworn off ever having another one because he had failed too. And that was part of it. It's like Obi-Wan wanted him more than anything, and so he was so desperate to have Qui-Gon as his master, but Qui-Gon was so skeptical of the idea of having another Padawan, so it took a lot for Obi-Wan to be able to finally get Qui-Gon as his master. Do you think they would ever, I guess, recast, though, and find like a younger Qui-Gon to be the Jedi Master in his prime of Obi-Wan's master? Or do you think they would recast Count Dooku, because now that Christopher Lee's gone? Which one of those two scenarios would you be more interested in seeing?
I would want to see Count Dooku doing stuff, but really, like, Count Dooku can only be Christopher Lee. Like, they would have to either recast them or deepfake them, like they have been.
I think it's a missed opportunity that they're not doing more, even further, where they do like Sifo Dyas and Count Dooku as kids. It could lead up to Count Dooku being Yoda's Padawan. Sifo Dyas going off and doing missions with his master and show the jealousy of Dooku. Dooku wanted Sifo Dyas as master.
I saw a rumor that Werner Herzog is Sifo Dyas. Like I aged Sifo Dyas.
You're saying like the client from this episode?
The client, yeah.
The client is actually Sifo Dyas that wasn't gunned down by the Pikes? How did he survive getting gunned down by the Pikes?
I don't know. I just read it on the internet.
That's going to wrap today's rectangular table discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please feel free to follow the podcast on Apple or Spotify. You can also follow the podcast, subscribe on YouTube. You can follow the podcast on Facebook. You can also interact with me on Twitter at NES9. If you're watching on Facebook, if you're watching on YouTube, comment your thoughts on the most recent Mandalorian episode. Comment your thoughts on the season as a whole. What do you all think will happen in the future with the Star Wars universe, with the show? I would love to interact with any of you. I'm always on Twitter giving sporadic fantasy football advice. It doesn't even have to be about Star Wars. I encourage lots of interactions. With that being said, catch you in the next one.